high in the mountain valleys of central Afghanistan, where the wind carries the sound of history and snow gathers across the slopes like white cloth laid for prayer, lived an Afghan Hazara family who had endured the hardest winter the mountains had offered in many years. Their mud clay home stood firmly against the cliffside, built from the same earth they walked on, cared for, and belonged to. Inside lived Karim, his wife Fatima, their 3 children, Nasir, Maryam, and Sami, and the elder of the home, Baba Zahir, whose memories stretched farther back than the roads that once linked valleys to valleys. This Afghan Hazara family had survived the deep winter with patience and unity. They had protected their goats from wolves, rationed their flour and barley, and kept their fire alive during every storm. But now, as the seasons leaned slowly toward change, there came a need not of fear, but of preparation. 2 of the goats were heavy with young, and the pen that had kept them safe in the worst nights was no longer enough. The herd would grow, their shelter must also grow. At first light, when the valley was still quiet, except for the gentle shifting of snow and the distant drip of melting ice, Karim called his eldest son, Nasir, out into the yard. The Afghan Hazara family had always passed skills down through hands, not through books. Father to son, mother to daughter, grandparent to child, and today was a day of skills passed forward. Karim looked at the goat pen, sturdy, but crowded, reinforced for defense, but not made for life to flourish. He rested his hand against the fence post and nodded. "It is time to build something better," he said. Nasir said nothing. In an Afghan Hazara family, understanding often came without words. His shoulders squared, and he followed his father. They walked along the slope where the snow had begun to recede just enough to show patches of earth. Finding wood in these mountains was never simple. The Afghan Hazara people had lived in these highlands for generations and knew which trees offered strong beams, which branches bent without breaking, and which pieces of fallen wood still carried the memory of rot. Father and son examined each trunk with quiet attention, tapping, weighing, listening with hands as much as ears. They found fallen branches of wild apricot trees and the straight limbs of mountain ash. Nasir tied them together with rope, and the 2 of them dragged the wood back toward the home, their breaths rising in cold clouds, the quiet crunch of snow beneath them the only sound. There was no complaint in their movements in the mountains. Work was life. At the home, Fatima and Maryam, wrapped in layered shawls, tended to the cooking fire. They were preparing warm tea and grinding barley into flour using a stone mill as old as the family line. Meanwhile, little Sami followed his father and brother back and forth, gathering twigs, trying to carry pieces too big for him, doing what youngest sons of Afghan Hazara families do, learning through watching, trying, and imitating. Karim and Nasir marked out the ground for the new shelter beside the pen, where the goats could move freely, where newborn kids would have room to stretch their legs. They packed the snow down to reach the earth, clearing stones and leveling the ground with their boots. Baba Zahir watched from the doorway, leaning on his walking stick, his old Hazara eyes quiet but sharp. "When you build for winters you have not yet seen," he said. His voice carried the weight of mountains. Karim began shaping the beams, shaving notches into the ends, with a steady, experienced hand, so the wood locked into itself without needing nails. These techniques were old, passed down through Hazara shepherds and farmers for centuries, made for places where winters were long and resources were scarce. Nasir held each beam steady, mirroring his father's focus. He did not rush. He did not sigh. He worked like someone who understood the meaning of what they were building. The frame of the new goat shelter began to rise, for strong corner posts driven deep into the earth, crossbeams fitted into their sockets, braces angled to hold against winter winds. It grew slowly, but it grew correctly, and in the high mountains, correctness was survival. Fatima brought out hot tea and fresh flatbread, baked in the clay tun. The Afghan Hazara family sat together on a woven rug laid atop the snow. They ate quietly, grateful not just for the food, but for one another, for the hands that helped, for the small warmth of sun on their backs. Then the work continued. Karim climbed the frame to set the highest beam while Nasir steadied the ladder. The rope creaked, The wood groaned, the wind moved through the mountains like a long memory, and standing there, tall, balanced, resolute, Karim looked like a figure formed by the mountains themselves, passing strength down through his hands to his son when the final upper beam was secured. The shape of the shelter stood clear, not finished, but solid, confident, grounded. The woven willow wall panels would come next. The mud and straw covering would come later. But the bones were strong. Baba Zahir walked slowly to the structure, placing his palm against the central post. And nodded onse, a nod full of history and pride. "This," he said, "will protect not only the animals, but the future. You have built as our ancestors built. This is the good way." And in the fading light of the afternoon, the Afghan Hazara family stood together, father, mother, children, grandfather, looking at what had been made by their hands, their patience, and their unity. No celebration was needed. The mountains do not care for applause, but they do respect resilience. That night, when the goats settled in their old pen, and the family returned inside to the warm glow of the hearth, there was a feeling in the air that was not joy and not relief, but something deeper, continuity, the knowing that one day, many winters from now, a grown Nasir will stand beside his own son, building something that lasts, the Afghan Hazara way.